Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, miners, shiners and oil refiners, welcome along to the Joe Spivey YouTube channel where we discuss books and little else. And you join me as usual in the fascistic junta of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. We are currently subject to a Rishi Sunak capital C Conservative premiership that has first of all sought to dissolve a high-speed rail line between London and the two major northern powerhouses of Manchester and Leeds. That has been all but scrapped in the last few weeks. And you need an Experian credit expert to go down to the supermarket with you to buy milk and loaves of bread. There are retinues of hooded ruffians with an evil glint in their eye that will have your guts for garters if you give them licence. What else is going on? And there is an emergent story just this moment, which is quintessentially Victorian, in that one of Mr. Sunak's prominent backbenchers, one of his old-time prominent backbenchers, Mr. Peter Bone, keep that surname in mind, just log it for future reference, Mr. Peter Bone has been suspended for 6 weeks by an independent committee for the crimes of bullying and sexual misconduct. You couldn't really make that up and be believable, could you? A gentleman by the surname of Bone has been done for sexual conduct. That almost trumps, I think about a year ago now, one of Boris Johnson's, fine aides in Downing Street went by the name of Mr. Pincher, and he was also done for sexual misconduct. So, quintessentially Trollopian and Victorian this morning by having people with surnames that indicate sexual misconduct being indeed convicted for sexual misconduct. I was cheered up the other day also by the Cosmic Skeptic, Alex O'Connor, who did an hour-long video with Peter Hitchens, whose work we've talked of on the channel previously. And I like Alex's YouTube channel. He's got hundreds of thousands of subscribers and does his videos really excellently. Talks about whether or not there may exist a divine prime mover, whether there's a god, whether we should eat meat, whether we should have children, antinatalism, things of that nature. And he had on his podcast or video, had on his channel, Peter Hitchens, who is usually very prudent, conscientious, very thoughtful, very measured, very calm, and he turned that prudent, straight-laced conservative into a petulant child. Alex O'Connor did the other day. He asked him, maybe for half an hour, 40 minutes, he asked him about decriminalisation of drugs, and then Peter went absolutely nuts, which cheered me up greatly because I like both of them, and neither of them shone in that video because Alex went on too long about decriminalising drugs, and Peter spat his dummy out, frankly, and then for the next 35 minutes after ending the interview early, was then recorded as having a circular argument in which he criticised Alex criticised him, and Alex looked like a rabbit in the headlights. But yeah, it made for excellent viewing, and Peter has since gone on a Twitter tirade about that. But I am going on far too long for that. You join me, ladies and gentlemen, for, I believe, our 5th instalment now of Victober, the booktube event organised, I believe, by Katie at Books and Things. Thank you ever so much for this. This has been wonderful to revisit Victorian literature, Katie. And today, as promised, we have a full-on review of Anthony Trollope's 1857 novel, Barchester Towers. Now, this is the second instalment of his Barchester series, which, despite my practice, I cannot pronounce properly. The second novel of the Barchester series follows the warden and is, what might we say, essentially the story of the vacancy and filling of 3 positions within the diocese of Barchester. So you have Archdeacon Grantley, who we met last time, whose father is Mr. Septimus Harding's friend, doesn't suddenly die, but dies of old age, and the position of Bishop of Barchester is up for grabs, and Grantley is initially convinced that he will be the shoe-in candidate, and by I think it's by virtue of, I think, prime ministerial patronage. Mr. Proudie is given it, who is a a submissive and docile and meek and indecisive person who has become prominent merely by virtue and accident of his birth, rather than any personal characteristics that manifest themselves. He's only in there because of where he's been born. So he is given the Bishop of Barchester, the status as Bishop of Barchester, and then he brings along his wife, Mrs. Proudie, who, as modern parlance would have it, wears the trousers in that relationship. She is overbearing and imposing and really quite priggish in her religious beliefs, and is intolerant of anybody else holding power. She's excellent. And they bring along with them to Barchester, they bring along a Mr. Slope, who is a... sorry, I'm struggling here because I also have a hot water bottle. You'll forgive, as I say, times are hard and friends are few. We haven't got the heating on yet. I'm just cuddling my hot water bottle for all it's worth, because it's cold in Britain now. We have a Mr. Slope, who is a little sort of sycophantic schemer and strategist of himself. He has designs on all sorts. He is described as having sort of sweaty, beefy, horrid, oleaginous skin. And yeah, is again a delightful inclusion by Trollope. He works really well in this novel. So that's where we are. We're at Barchester. Trollope also introduces us to, or has Mr. Proudie call back somebody who is, or a family that have been in Italy for at least, I think, about a decade. The Stanhopes, who are, I believe, connected to the church somewhat, and they have the Stanhopes themselves aren't. The father doesn't play a particularly large role in the novel, but he has a daughter and a son. The son called, but he has two daughters and a son, but only one son and one daughter are prominent. He has Bertie Stanhope, who is a little imbecile. He's a wastrel. He is slightly artistic, but he is irreverent and indolent and lazy and all of the things which come, I imagine, with artistic boyhood or pseudo-artistic boyhood. Not that I would know anything about that. He's got a big beard and a big load of hair and wears wafty trousers. Would, in the 21st century, probably be throwing orange paint at Van Goghs and, dyeing his hair blue and telling everybody that certain things ought to be. And then he is obviously the brother of Madeline Stanhope, who, whilst in Italy, has married a wrong 'un. She's married an Italian by the name of Neroni, so she becomes Signora Neroni. And she is, I believe, one-legged. She certainly is carried around constantly on a sofa, but she's immensely interesting and will become much more prominent in the novel later on. So that's essentially all of our inclusions. We have about halfway through the novel, because the wardenship or the position of warden is also debated yet again, as it was in the last novel, with under slightly new auspices. So there will now be, as well as 12 beadsmen for the prospective warden to look after, there will be 12 other women to look after as well. So they're going to double the intake, the clientele for the warden, and going to make him do all sorts of other weird things as well. And everybody thinks again that Mr. Harding's a shoo-in, but Mrs. Proudie, who, as we say, wears the trousers and makes all the decisions, has very different and other ideas. So that's very interesting as well. And as soon as they arrive, the Proudies do not get on very well with the major runners and riders in Barchester. Mr. Slope gives a very weird sermon criticising what he views to be the decorative nature of the Anglican Church and how much of the grandeur and all of the robes and things and all of the musicality of much of the church processes are distracting from worship, I assume. And then Mrs. Proudie talks often about the observing the Sabbath day and things like that. So that's the setting for it. Mr. Arabin is then brought in by Dr. Grantley, who, as we know, is not somebody to lie down when it looks as if somebody else is taking control of the polity. And so he brings in Mr. Arabin, who will be the... I don't know what his official title will be, but he will look after St. Ewolds or St. Ewolds, next to Mr. and Miss Thorne's place. So he's a particularly prominent character, and we also have a note from the what happened previously in Trollope's book, The Warden. John Bold, who was intimately involved in trying to scurrilously rid the church of Septimus Harding, has died, and Mrs. Bold, the Warden's daughter, is a widow. And so there we have the second sort of plot line. We have three gentlemen. You have Mr. Slope, you have Bertie Stanhope, and you have Mr. Arabin, all vying for different reasons for Mrs. Bold's hand. And this is done beautifully and brilliantly, as is usual with Trollope. I've got a few things that I want to bring up. I've got 3 or 4 sections that I want to highlight, but first of all, it's so joyous to read him. You are just... It kindles within you just a love of reading, and of you think for the opening 5 or 10 pages you think, how on earth has somebody looked at a blank page and set to and written this? And of course the reality is, in writing this in particular, he had a desk installed on a train in a train compartment, and wrote whilst he was travelling for his postal duties. We woke up at about 5 in the morning and wrote for a couple of hours at a ridiculous pace of 250 words per minute, I believe, or something like that. And so never has somebody written so regimentally and yet so beautifully. It's so very good. As I say, there are a couple of things that I want to highlight, but yeah. The 3 things that I love about Trollope are certainly his confidence. There are many, 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 many times in this book, probably 20, where he tells us, he admits that that Barchester Towers by Anthony Trollope is artifice, that it's a novel. He tells us over and over again, as I say, at least over a dozen times, this is a book, dear reader. A writer is constructing these characters. This is not a real world. It might be an apposite or apt. It might be a realistic reflection of, particular occurrences in my real world. But this is artifice. This is a piece of art. This is work, and not real life. And he has the confidence and the control not for that not to completely dissolve the matter. Because as I say, in a lesser writer's hands, that would be the end. You would send the thing flying out of your window as per usual. But Trollope makes it work, and it's excellent. So there are a few sections I want to highlight. I've obviously talked about his control. I want to talk about his humour as well. He uses long-standing stereotypes and inverts them in a way that, again, isn't sickly and sort of... When Dickens does it, it's obviously disinteresting because it's so obvious what he's doing, whereas Trollope does it much more subtly. Again, I'll highlight some of those. And again, the dimensionality of his character, the 3-dimensionality of his characters. He essentially what I've gathered from Trollope's books so far is that he likes good people that. Well, first of all, he likes good people that aim to do good things, but in either a bad way or an unproductive way, and he likes fundamentally bad people that do evil or cause pain well. So he likes good people that try to be good badly, and he likes bad people that are bad but are bad well, if you see what I mean. So we've got 4 sections that I want to highlight here, which will hopefully somehow show you just what it is I'm talking about. So the first section is Mrs. Proudie, who is, as we've said, I believe it's a Sabbatarian is how it might be pronounced. So she is somebody who wants to control others and thinks that, as ever, that all the greats are in their graves and that people should be a little bit more straight-laced and a little bit tighter and a little bit more corseted by the times. And then this is an example of, so you've got that as background knowledge, and then Trollope goes on, woe betide the recreant housemaid who is found to have been listening to the honey of a sweetheart in the Regent's Park instead of the soul-stirring evening discourse of Mr. Slope. Not only is she sent adrift, but she is so sent with a character which leaves her little hope of a decent place. Woe betide the 6-foot hero who escorts Mrs. Proudie to her pew in red plush breeches, if he slips away to the neighbouring beer shop instead of falling into the back seat appropriated to his use. So it talks about how if you don't follow Miss Proudie's rules, or if you're not a Sabbatarian like her, you're in for it. And Trollope uses that really excellently. The second section focuses on Trollope's breaking down of the fourth wall, which, as I said, he does so many times in this book to such great effect. So, well, here we are. So he says, as it becomes, by word of mouth, it becomes, everybody thinks it's probable that the horrid, ginger, scheming Mr. Slope is going to marry Miss Bold, purely because she doesn't absolutely spit in his face like everybody else. People take that as a advocacy of him or a liking to him, which of course is bogus. But yeah, but then Trollope instantly lets us know, don't worry, that's not going to happen, and does it really well. So here we are, this is the section. But let the gentle-hearted reader be under no apprehension whatsoever. It is not destined that Eleanor shall marry Mr. Slope or Bertie Stanhope, and here perhaps it may be allowed to the novelist to explain his views on a very important point in the art of telling tales. He ventures to reprobate that system which goes so far to violate all proper confidence between the author and his readers, by maintaining nearly to the end of the third volume a mystery as to the fate of their favourite personage. Nay, more and worse than this is too frequently done. Have not often the profoundest efforts of genius been used to baffle the aspirations of the reader, to raise false hopes and false fears, and give rise to expectations which are never to be realised? And it goes on like that for a good few pages. He is remarkable at digging some of his contemporaries in the ribs, as we have done here on this channel already, and yeah, just he almost commonizes himself and saying, "Look, I'm just a writer. I don't put all of my heft into my plots." And the confidence that you need to do that, and then the skill to execute it successfully, is very rare. But it's what Trollope's really, really good at. The third section talks about what we might term as what is termed as, in modern scholarship, as interiority versus a person's outward display. Again, something Trollope's brilliant at. He shows you how very differently somebody can be on the inside to somebody else on the outside, which is, of course, the whole reason why we read fiction, and presumably Victorian fiction, is to know what it was like to be in a sermon maid's head 300 years ago, rather than a boy of 21 in Northern England in 2023. That's the whole reason we read fiction. It's what Trollope's great at. So here's the third section. So this is about Mr. Arabin, who is, as I say, the arrival, who is impassive and seems to like Mrs. Bell from afar, but isn't the type of person to impose himself upon her. So it says, it has been said that Mr. Arabin was a man of pleasantry, and it may be thought that such a state of mind as that described would be antagonistic to humour. But surely such is not the case. Wit is the outward mental casing of the man, and has no more to do with the inner mind of thoughts and feelings than have the rich brocaded garments of the priest at the altar with the asceticism of the anchorite below them, whose skin is tormented with sackcloth, and whose body is half flayed with rods. Nay, will not such a one often rejoice more than any other in the rich show of his outer apparel? Will it not be food for his pride to feel that he groans inwardly while he shines outwardly? It's just very, very good. Telling us there how Mr. Arabin is humorous on the inside and has so much more to offer, but certain societal and personal constraints mean that he cannot do so. And then our fourth section is just very quickly on, if I can get there, again, the nuance of character, which Trollope is a master at, because as I say, he doesn't create what Dickens does, which I've described, and many have also, of gargoyles, people that are evil for evil's sake. You know, the Michael Caine quote, "Some men just want to watch the world burn." That was a terrible impression, but when in describing Heath Ledger's Joker in The Dark Knight, evil for evil's sake, whereas most people, as we know, are evil for their own advancement and their own purposes. They don't just delight in beheading people and watching their heads lollop down the street. They want to do it to gain a certain position or some, wealth or likening. And so we have here Bertie Stanhope, who is seen of as a bit of a philanderer as well as a bit of a, as we say, a bon vivant, like an artiste. So this is showing the subtle modulations that Trollope's capable of. It has been said that Bertie Stanhope was a man without principle. Oh, he certainly was so. He had no power of using active mental exertion to keep himself from doing evil. Evil had no ugliness in his eyes, virtue no beauty. He was void of any of those feelings which actuate good men. But he was perhaps equally void of those which actuate men to do evil. He got into debt with utter recklessness, thinking nothing as to whether the tradesman would ever be paid or not, but he did not invent active schemes of deceit for the sake of extracting the goods of others. Meaning, he's not purposefully evil or perhaps even purposely lazy. He is just, you see how there, it's much subtler. Somebody isn't just evil through and through. They're not just dick dastardly. They are perhaps unappealing for their own purposes, and Trollope's, that's what real people are like, generally. We know this. It's very rare that you meet even somebody of, Hitlerian demonic intentions wants, as I say, world prominence as opposed to just wants to gas a load of people. So it's about the modulation of evil, or not evil, but bad things that happen. And I wanted just to mention as well, I was surprised to discover that obviously the two major scientific discoveries or books written in the period that are often alluded to are obviously Origin of Species and Charles Lyell's, I can't remember that, Principles of Geology, both of which repudiate the existence of a god, really, as well as many of the great things that they do as well. They say that the world's been around for an awful lot longer than the 1800 years that your Sunday priest tells you it has been. And you can see in here how, with it being quite theatrical and with it being just somebody spinning a tale and telling a readership and an audience what's going on and stripping completely the agency of, for example, Mrs. Bold, who it is known, who we are told and informed very early on, as I've just read, that neither Bertie Stanhope nor Mr. Slope will ever be with her and ever get anywhere matrimonially with her. So he strips the agency really well, and you can see through there how, I don't know whether this is peculiar to the Victorian period, where how much many of the authors seem to want to place themselves as some kind of worldly god. They want to strip the agency of many of the characters and tell others about it and just observe what happens, much in the fashion of a deity. And I was really surprised that The Origin of Species was published 2 years after this, I think. It was 59 and this was 57. But I do know that he had, I think, didn't Darwin have a sort of understudy that was perhaps doing some of the work a little earlier or contemporaneously with him? So that I assume the ideas about creationism being complete and utter codswallop and the world being millions of years old rather than the, as I say, 1800 that much of religion would have been telling you. So there are key undercurrents of that as well, about there being about not a rise of atheism but a rise of certain theological questioning. That's writ large here as well. As to whether I'm imposing it on the text or whether Trollope meant it, I'm not sure. But yeah, great introduction here, written by Robin Gilmore. Doesn't for once mention Freud or Marx or Foucault or Lacan or anybody like that. Just talks about Trollope's life and some of the sort of clashes between governmentally, the clashes between the Anglican Church, two sides of how people thought religion ought to operate, essentially. Yeah, really nice introduction. But yeah, thoroughly enjoyed this. Trollope is probably now my favourite Victorian writer. I don't know how outlandish that statement is, but yeah, really enjoyed this. I will get to Mr. Thorne, which is the third book in the series at some point, I assume, maybe not during Victober. And I'll very quickly announce, because I realise this has gone on perhaps a little, the next read, Alfred Lord Tennyson, In Memoriam, written about the same 1850, I think. Seeing as we've binned chronology and we're just reading whatever we want, I have, In Memoriam by Alfred Lord Tennyson to read. Hopefully I might have some reactions about that due maybe the end of the week. But yeah, I've read bits and bobs of it. I read bits and bobs of it at university and really liked it, and was led in a very weird direction as per usual. I would just like to study it of my own free will, essentially now. So that should be jolly good, hopefully. Another tremendous and large thank you for everybody that's been really nice in the comments and that has stimulated some conversation on all sorts. You seem to like my book haul. Lots of you liked some of the covers, and it was nice to see, because I think quite a lot of you are Americans. So it was quite nice for some of you to tell me that you hadn't seen any of the copies of the particular books that I picked up, because perhaps they just hadn't made their way across the pond. So that was really interesting. Again, this is only the start. You've all bought yourselves a seat at the round table when, as I say, when I take global dominion and make Earth my own, you'll all have a seat at the original round table, and you'll all be there with me. So yes, it's goodbye from me and my pink hot water bottle for now. And bye from Anthony Trollope and Alfred Lord Tennyson. But again, thank you all so much you've been delightful and welcomed me. This pompous little git suddenly has some friends on the internet. So yes, thank you ever so much for watching. Thank you for all your comments, and see you again, BookTube.